Welcome to the second part of our seminar today. This part is going to be in English to be more inclusive. Not everybody is fluent in Swedish. And what we want to talk about today is the prospects for open book publishing in the future. And in the panel, our distinguished panel, we have Eva Stensköld from Riksbankens Jubileumsfond. We have Niklas Gårdfeldt Leavy from Natur Kultur. We have Elisabeth Wåghäll Nivre, Deputy Vice President for Human Science and Professor of Journal and Literature. And at the very end, last but not least, Åke Ingerman, Chair in the Steering Committee for Kriterium and also Professor and Dean at the Department of Pedagogical, Curricular and Professional Studies at the University of Gothenburg. Welcome. I would like you all to briefly introduce yourself a little bit more than just the text on paper and why you chose to come to this seminar today and discuss open book publishing with us. Eva, would you like to start?
Yes. I have been working quite a lot with research infrastructures and open science, mainly research data perhaps, but also open publications. So it's an interest that I've been holding on to, both at the Swedish Research Council, where I have worked, now at the private funder, Riksbankens Jubileumsfond, and I've also worked at the Ministry of Education and Research and the Ministry of Culture. So that's why it's a keen interest of mine.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, well, I guess I'm the face of the boogeyman because I'm with a publisher. Well, I think it's very important that, first of all, that we distinguish between open access publishing when it comes to scientific articles and textbooks for students. If you mix those two, the discussion is fairly incomprehensible, I think. So that's my angle, I guess, as a publisher of textbooks for students.
Yeah, wonderful, thank you.
Well, I guess I'm here in my capacity of Deputy Vice President on the other hand, but I think that when it comes to open access publishing, it's simply because I have been following Stockholm University Press since its very beginning. So I've been very interested in open access publishing. And I think that my interest also ties well into some of the areas we're going to touch upon, and that is publishing in fields that are not necessarily huge in the country that you're working in, to put it that way. We're often talking about the small languages, and small languages are usually all languages but Swedish and English. And we know that there are some other languages that are spoken by many people. And I think this is where we do have certain problems when we discuss open access publishing and what we can do. So I'll stop there for now.
Good introduction. Thank you. Okay.
Yes, I'll my engagement has mainly been with publication of scientific books and open access publications of scientific books, and to have the possibilities of books in the academic publishing tradition and the kind of role that those books have for the development of especially sciences in human sciences as social science. And over the past 10 years, I've been working with the initiative of that kind of publishing and to put that into the contemporary landscape, coming from then an editorial role in one of the university series. So starting with that.
Thank you. So lots of different perspectives here. That's also why we wanted to engage you all, because we don't think that there's one rule that we should all follow. It depends what we need to do, well, who the readership is and so forth. To move on then to our questions, we sent you 3 questions in advance that you all could think about and philosophize about before you came. So I would like to start with the first question. And how do you think we can reach the target of 100% open access to academic books by 2026? The question itself is a little bit provocative because we're not quite there yet, and it could be debated. But what do you think the prospects are here? Would you like to start, Åke?
Well, I see if I can pick the question apart into some interesting pieces. I think first you need to broaden the scope a little bit and look at academic publishing as a whole. And then in particular, I think you need to look at the relationship between journals or article publications and books. And as I mentioned earlier, I think it's that books have a very important role in academic publishing. And what we see now is that the infrastructure for publications, open access publications in journals is much more developed than for monographs and for edited works. And this, in practice, we may reach this target by stop publishing books. Then everything which is published as books will be open access. But I think that is not a good prospect. So what I think that we need to look at is to develop, I think, a broad frame of initiatives, and I don't think that we will be finished by 2026, of possibilities for publishing books that will give back insurance and quality feedback and recognition for researchers, and that they take the step of investing the time and effort into writing good scientific books that push the field forward. And further with that, that can also then experiment and give us new forms. I think there is many interesting hybrid forms in relationship to digital publications, which we have not explored. For just to give one example, I had a talk with publishing in language, and that now writes texts in English and quotes in these texts, even if the original is in some other language, the quote is in English. And something which we don't do is that we don't have digital editions that include several layers of quotes, for example. Why don't we have that? Because we think in terms of traditional books. We need to do both. We need to both take the traditional books with us, but we need to reinvent ourselves in the contemporary times and to use the tools in creative ways. And I think that is the way forward. So there is not a policy answer to this, because I think that is detrimental, but we need to absorb this in the research community and build infrastructures that make sense and that actually pushes our fields forward, because that is why we do it. We don't publish because of publishing. We publish because we do research and we want to advance knowledge and our fields.
Thank you. Okay, that was a really good start. Elisabeth, what do you think? How can we reach the target of 100%?
Yes, and now I was still thinking about what you were saying. So I'll start with 100%, because my question is, do we necessarily want to reach 100%? Is it absolutely necessary that it's 100? Should it even? Would 96% be better? What happens to the 4% left? I'm simply not very fond of the absolute number 100, because I do think that in general, as I already stated, I'm all for open access publishing. And I see plenty of advantages. And you actually mentioned what I was thinking about, working in the field of early modern German literature, that is approximately 1450 to 1700. My books, I mainly work on prints, but it's still not the print that our students are familiar with. It is, we often have quotes in Latin. And then it is the book in German, and then maybe I write something about the book in English. So I think these layers on the possibility of actually having the quotes so that you can click into the different languages, that is just one of those things that I think can open up the eyes for many scholars who think that the traditional way of publishing is the one and only way. But having said that, I think that we also need to think about academic publishing, maybe you can reach an audience in a country with a language that is not spoken by so many, if you actually publish that book in that language and in paper and through a familiar printing or publishing house in that country. Maybe no one of that intended audience would find to the book if it's open access. We shouldn't forget that there are other ways than the internet to reach our readers. So that is why I'm hesitant to talk about 100%, but to actually find ways that suit us the best to make research results official. Because of course, if we have a big project and it's a book project, there could also be a little booklet project in a different language about the same topic. And of course, now we're here from the humanities, two of us, social sciences. It's a whole different scenario, of course, in the natural sciences, but then again, there are far fewer monographs published. It's so much journals. Maybe I should stop there.
You will get plenty of time to elaborate on that. Niklas, what do you think about 100% open access? Is that something that you've been thinking about?
Yeah, well, you're not that fond of quantifying, but I think I can quantify this answer, and I think I know the answer.
Please.
0. It's not going to happen. And once again, we need to distinguish between scientific publishing and textbook publishing for students. And given the discussion, we are supposed to include textbooks for students, and the chance of that happening is 0. You've existed for more than 10 years and you published 50 books. And if you quantify those 50 books for a university, then you'd be done in about 100,000 years or so. It would be my guess. But I also think it's publishing. I mean, academia is also an ecosystem, and there's a role for us. If you can commodify something, it's commodified for a reason. And that's because we are skilled professionals that know what we're doing. And we can also maneuver things that you avoided in the previous panel, which is, for example, power struggles within the university environment, which is something that has to be addressed. And we can actually do that, even though people don't think that we do that, but we do that. You could, of course, move our profession inside the universities, and in that way, it would be, so to speak, free. But the day when the textbook for students will be completely free, that's the same day as it's free in supermarkets to go and just pick food, or going to a clothes shop and just take some clothes and walk out.
There are no free lunches.
No, and I also think it's worrying from a very serious perspective when it comes to our civilization, when students are saying that we don't want to read the textbooks, we don't want to buy the textbooks. It's like, it's like going to a symphony orchestra where they don't have any instruments and they've never practiced their instrument. And a key function for the university is to churn out professionals in various fields, and we have to know that those professionals know something. And that's what we do in the publishing houses. We package that in a way. So I have a big problem with the actual question.
Yeah, good. That was the intention.
Okay, so I'm come from a sort of I will take a different stance here.
Yep.
From a funder perspective, and perhaps from the government perspective, as I've been working there. I have my small notes here. I've been keeping on to those. I have actually found that for the question, will we reach 100% of open access to academic books? No. But we have started walking along a path. And a way to reach 100% is, of course, to continue walking in the direction that we have started. And I have actually found that a good way, a successful way of working towards open access is that, and driving change in this area is to collaborate, participate with different international organizations, on the Nordic level, in the EU level, etc. And to drive change this way, change my notes here now, sorry. This was more practical with not handheld microphone.
Sorry about that.
No, it's no problem. And the agreements that come out of these collaborations that Sweden has with a whole lot of different countries on a global international level, whether they are called white papers, green papers, council conclusions, etc., is that they can then be implemented on the national level as a national policy, guidelines, etc., in Sweden through, of course, the research and innovation bills or the assignments for different governments and higher education institutions, and then translated into guidelines and policies in the research community. But in order, of course, for such requirements and demands from above to be successful, there has to be incentives. There has to be a will to drive this change within the research community itself. And the change you want to implement must be, of course, beneficial for the individual researcher. And it was mentioned in the previous panel session that the merit system, of course, has to change in order for researchers to want to drive this change. And there's, of course, must be possibilities to implement these changes. There must be conditions, good conditions in place. Open publishing should be a simple and obvious choice for researchers. It is not today. And of course, all this can only be done if each actor in the research policy landscape contribute according to their conditions and their role in the landscape. And this is also how the development in the open science has worked, from the first Budapest and Berlin declarations from 2002, 2003, and up to the council conclusions on high quality, transparent, open, trustworthy, and equitable scholarly publishing that hopefully will be approved at the upcoming Competitiveness Council on the 23rd of May as part of the Swedish presidency in the EU. Yeah. So perhaps long answer, but that was my sort of perspective from a funding agency.
But I think that is a really important perspective, because I think it ties into what we see as a value, both at universities and at publishing houses, because at the end of the day, as we mentioned this in the first panels, for those of you who were not listening at that time, there are no free lunches. Even if Stockholm University Press, for example, publishes open access books, and so does Kriterium, somebody has to pay for the production of those. And that is where this policy and funding initiative comes in. How can we deal with this together? And that's also why we call this Together Towards Open Science, because we cannot change it, you cannot change it, but together we could do something. Because I don't think we should disregard from professionalism in putting together a really good course literature book, for example. So I think if that is okay, I will move a little bit into the next question, which is more about possibilities. So the question was, how can we provide or create possibilities for researchers to publish more open books? There are many different ways to do this, not necessarily just the original book, but you could, for example, publish a copy of the book in a repository and things like that. So there are different ways of approaching this. But in your view, as a representing a funder, how do you think we can or do already create possibilities?
Yes. As a funding agency, I think it's important to take lead on national policies when implementing guidelines for open science in our organizations, and to align and harmonize with other funding agencies when doing this, to follow up on our open science guidelines for funded projects, to fund initiatives that in their turn enables open science, such as, for example, Kriterium that Åke is here representing, Open Library of Humanities, there are several, Coalition S, another one, implement a funding model that covers all costs for open science in academic, of course. And we can comply also to initiatives focusing on assessing research on its own merits, rather than on the basis of the journal in which they were published, such as the Quora or DORA initiative. So that's what we as a funding agency can do.
To sort of create some kind of backdrop on possibilities. Yeah, good, interesting. I have so many questions to you, but I'll leave that. Niklas, what do you think from your perspective? You want to continue to sell books, of course, no wonder in that. But do you think there are any possibilities that you can do working together with researchers who, for example, might have a policy from their university to adhere to?
Yeah, absolutely. But first of all, I'm not only in this game to sell books.
No, good.
I love science. That's why I am where I am. But anyway, I mean, the biggest hurdle I think is publish or perish.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the biggest hurdle. A lot of really talented, in my opinion, then writers and researchers within my field of publishing would like to write, but they are not able to write because they are in that swamp of publish or perish all the time. And also the question of merit, of course.
What has the value, so to speak.
Because to be really blunt, I mean, I know of many instances where people from a vanity point of view would like to publish a book because they might have a scientific argument with someone else, but they don't have the time to do it. So in one way, I think it's the publish or perish problem has to be addressed from my perspective.
Yeah, but do you think then that your company such as yours could contribute something to this?
Well, it's hard if we don't work together, as the previous speaker was saying. I think the question of merit has to be addressed, which is the case in Norway, for example. Then, and for them, it's easier because of this. But it also makes them produce more boring books, to be honest, because they have to follow a certain format, which is more from within academia, whereas we can be freer and actually be more accessible for students.
Yeah.
My primary focus is always the students.
Yeah. Good.
And of course, science transmits to the students.
Good. Yeah. Thank you. Elisabeth? How can we create or provide possibilities?
Yes, many of the questions we're discussing don't necessarily have to do only with open access publishing or other publishing houses, because there are general questions of how do we publish in general, and we have different tradition and different fields, and it's not only AI publishing that is digitally published today, so we need to think about that too. But if I take on my glasses as a supervisor of doctoral students, I think we really need to discuss with our young scholars how they can publish in a smart way. And a smart way is, how do I get my book dissertation read? And now I'm also thinking of the different publishing situations for doctoral students in different countries. In Sweden, it has been quite common that you actually publish your book before you defend it. In Germany, you cannot get your degree if it's published before you defend it, because then it's a published book. You have to find a publisher within a year after your defense. So this also leads to different publication patterns within academia. And so I think we, on a national level, we have to, and on a subject area level, we need to think about what is it we are actually, what kind of research output do we have? And how do we want it to be read and seen? Because that's also different depending on what field you're in. So I think that we always have to start with the young, and I think that sometimes think that we wouldn't even have this discussion in 50 years because we will have 25 years, because thinking of the generations that are now starting to study at the university, when I started to work in Sweden in 95, I had to have classes in how to use Word in order to get papers not handwritten. I don't think that a single student will think about that today. They will just hit on print and we'll get a printed copy, or they will send an email. So I think that some of these problems will simply not be a problem. but they are, as long as we're standing in between, we're in this transition period. And I often make the comparison with the advent of print in the 15th century, when we still have the big offices with people sitting copying by hand. And they thought about all their jobs getting lost. I mean, we have the same discussions, just a slightly different way. Now, how do we get our research out? And of course, if it's paid by governmental funding, then it will remain a problem if we cannot get it out to as many as possible in a fairly simple way and in a way that isn't too expensive. So if that is called open access, I think that is the way we need to go, but that doesn't mean that I think that the publishing houses don't fit at all into the landscape anymore. We just have to think about new ways and different ways of working.
What do you think about creating possibilities? Publish more open books.
I think I'll take this opportunity to tell you a little bit more about how we did with Kriterium, because I think that is what we try to do. We try to create possibilities to publish open books and to develop the ideas of academic books in the contemporary landscape. And I think there are some core principles that we started with. One of them was that we had a mission which was not open access. We had a mission of we want to be relevant with academic books today. And we want to be recognized for the work we do in relationship to our merit. We want to make a difference in our fields. So that was the starting point. And in that landscape, open access is one component. But we did not leave the traditional publications of printed books behind, but rather today I would describe in all the way Kriterium as a large collaboration project. If I mention the coalition, we are now 13 universities and university colleges. We are funders, Riksbankens Jubileumsfond and the Swedish Research Council, the Royal Library, and then we also have publishers, scientifically oriented small publishers, because this is the kind of books that we publish, but still commercial publishers. And then university series, which also is a kind of publisher in the sense in the traditional academic format. And the Kriterium is sort of a build on the traditional publication in the university series and the publishers, where Kriterium has sort of a structured peer review system which can be applied on top of that, and it is attached formally to the open access publication, and then the traditional publication with the publisher goes on the side of that. And I think that has been an open structure. So we try to build and not to exclude. We are still very small in that sense, but in terms of academic books, that market is not that large.
But would you be open to other publishers to tag along to your model?
Absolutely. But one of the problems with working with large publishers, if you are focusing on student textbooks, for example, that is something else. We don't do that. Also, what happens if you include a serious peer review process is that it takes time. It needs to be in certain formats. We had a meeting this week in our steering group and the publishers raised, there is a problem with this time delay and the unpredictability of those time delays of peer review and this which season will this book be on and so on. And this is of course, these are real problems to deal with and which are difficult to deal with. And we need to find more ways to move forward there. But these are, we also then try to build this that it should be simple and available. In some sense, we adhere to the diamond standard of open access in terms of it's not a direct cost either for authors or for readers. If you want to buy the book, there is, of course, a cost applied to that if you want a printed book. And sort of we see then the open access as a way of dissemination and opening up for searching and so on, rather than to replacing the physical book. And I think that those components are important. There are many challenges in terms of doing this. One of them, which publishers are very good at, they're professional at publishing. And I think you should not remember not to take that away. And I think that is a very important contribution. So how you can combine that in the landscape, but have the infrastructure and the digital infrastructure that is necessary to do this. We have similar kind of solution that Stockholm University Press in collaborations. And then I think all these interfaces to other kinds of books and other initiatives, I think it's important to explore more. But we would be very open to develop that collaboration with publishers. And there are a number of, but typically it's the smaller publishers which have scientific books as part of their idea of what they do. And thus find it useful to collaborate with us. So I think that working with this kind of initiatives from many different directions, I think is one way forward. And I think it needs to be grounded in that way. Otherwise, we risk it having a very a detrimental policy approach, which I think can be, there is a big danger in that, but I think it's not, you need policy as well. You know, without the funders and the support, for example, from Riksbankens Jubileumsfond, Kriterium would never have been possible in that. So you need to combine, you need to think on several levels at the same time. And this is, of course, a challenge.
I agree. It's working for an open access publisher. I know it's a challenge. But to sum up this question, if I correct me if I'm wrong. So we need collaboration, work together to figure this out. Policies vis-a-vis the reader's needs and the students' needs for good literature. And then also we need to keep options open. There's not a one-size-fits-all model that we can apply to everybody. So maybe not 100%, I don't know. But also to create some kind of merit or value in what we do, maybe explore that more, because I think from my perspective, working in this business for more than 20 years, I think the merit system has been built on publishing articles, and that's not necessarily useful for those who are not publishing articles, and we shouldn't forget that. So I see it as a wonderful possibility to create something new here, but we do. And maybe we'll not agree on what that possibility should be, but at least we're working on it. And it also seems to be very important, especially in this field, to preserve diversity, to make sure that there are different angles, different possibilities. Think about the reader even more than before, perhaps. Do you agree with me? Diversity, collaboration. It sounds wonderful, doesn't it? How can we not come further? Because I think for all of us here, we're here because we want to collaborate and want to talk about these things. And that leads me to the last question in our little preparation email, is that why do you think that we are still, why did the journal publishers go way ahead of us in terms of open publishing? Why is the traditional publishing route still more relevant than any alternative? I mean, I'm sure that Niklas gets questions from researchers every day who would like to publish with him. We get one a week maybe. So why do we think this? Does anybody want to start? Elisabeth? Yeah.
Well, I think it's a matter of something being still quite new. If we look at academic publishing and the monograph, we have been using publishing houses for quite some time.
A few hundred years.
Yes. Patience, I think, sometimes is needed too, to see what we need. Some of us have seen the advantages of open access publishing quickly, maybe because we have had firsthand experience, or we've seen someone successfully publishing open access. And I was talking about doctoral students. If you're supervised by a person who has her own series with a publishing house, why should that supervisor say, well, why don't you go somewhere else and publish open access? So certain things take time, and I don't think it's necessarily bad, because there have been a number of questions raised here today that also show that we need to think twice about certain changes, and also think about what you said initially about the options that OA open access publishing, digital open access publishing has that traditional paper publishing doesn't. So new keyword, patience.
No, but
No,
but it's always patience, isn't it? With knowledge, it takes time.
it takes time.
Yeah.
And now that I'm not so young anymore, I can see that it has gone awfully quickly. So I think that as we go, more colleagues will trust new systems, and that will work for change. And those of us who already have seen the good parts of the new system simply have to work on that. And then since I don't believe in very much 100% of anything, I think we have to accept that there will be deviations and that they could be needed.
Sometimes. Interesting, yeah. Niklas, what do you think? Why do you think people would rather go to you?
For the same reason that people who want to buy bread go to a bakery. It's because we're professionals, we know what we're doing. That's why people come to us. We add value to text in this case. That's why we are still around. And again, I think it's very important that we differentiate between what we're talking about here. Scientific articles, that's one thing, and textbooks for students, that's what I am talking about. So I am all for open access when it comes to scientific articles, completely all for it. So I think that's my simple answer. It's because we know what we're doing, and also because of the fact that we are gatekeepers, which is something that's kind of a sore subject to touch upon from various different angles, of course. So
to create some kind of trustworthiness, you mean that this is something that's been through checks? I agree. Publishers do add value. Yes. Sorry, I had to think a little bit. Eva, what do you think? Why do you think the traditional route? I mean, you've been talking about that there are policies in place, there are funders who are supporting this maybe winding road towards open access. But what do you think? Why is the traditional route still more popular among book authors?
I have no good answer to that. Maybe because it is somewhat more complicated than with journals, so it's taken a little more time. But we are getting there. I mean, the Swedish Research Council is now mandating open access to books funded by their funds, of course. We do not do that yet, but we always try to follow the Swedish Research Council. So I would not be surprised if we land in a decision quite soon that we will also mandate open access to books for projects that receive funding from us. And that means immediate open access, no embargo, fully licensed, etc. With an as open license as possible for the material in the books, and the possibility perhaps of having different licensing for the text and for any illustrations that you have that might be more difficult to publish openly. So I think that mandates work, soft pressure, but also offering opportunities and funding, of course. But we can't change the system on our own. We need the universities, we need the government, we need all actors in the system to contribute.
Thank you. Åke, why do you think people would rather go to Niklas than to Kriterium? Or is it a contradiction?
But Niklas don't publish our kinds of books.
No, exactly.
So, and if you did, I think you would collaborate with us.
Yes.
So I think that there is, but I think that's something that you said, Niklas. I think you add value, but I think that what we're talking about here is also value that we add to the publication of books. And I think that we need to see beyond the contradictory positions, because we need to add several kinds of values to the same publications. We need to add both the open access publication value, the contemporary forms of and creative forms of publishing, and we need to add the traditional publisher value, and we need to keep in sight both the also the academic purpose of publishing. What I think becomes problematic is in the very extreme forms of publishing, publishing houses, which pushes away the core purposes of academic publishing from the academic world. I think this is the problem. And when it is combined with pricing that is moving resources and access away in very detrimental way, if we're talking about the rights for publications is disappearing from the intellectual authors for 70 years after their death, I think this is not proportionate in terms of what is the kind of added value. So I think we need to find and close the system in terms of that it's traditional publishing in its sort of traditional sense, and combined with the contemporary possibilities of digitalization, really, and the ideas of open access and different kind of cost structure. I think that is, we need to find different ways of and when we pay in different ways and as different actors, as funders, as universities, as individual buyers of books, we need to combine this in more creative ways to move forward. I think that's where our system now is lacking, because now we get a competition between forces that I think it would be better off collaborating.
Very wise comment.
Simple to say.
Yes. So with that said, I would like also to open up. Do we have any questions from the audience in the room or online? Hello. Would you like to ask the panel any questions? We don't have much time because this was so interesting. Anyone?
Everyone wants cake.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we're all looking forward to the cake. Lunch was a long time ago. I do have one question from the chat to the previous session, but I think it's relevant here as well. And I'm going to translate it because it's in Swedish, so please bear with me. The question was, students read less and less course literature. Many bear witness that it's enough with just a PowerPoint from the lecturer and some previous exams to know what's coming on the next exam. What do you think should be done to increase the status of course literature or academic literature as a teaching tool? Are there too many shortcuts for students?
Well, in one way, I would say yes, because I think we're bypassing the question of reading comprehension, for example.
Yeah.
Students entering the university arena and who are not going to pursue a career within academia. Again, I come back to my argument about the fact that we're also, this is also about churning out professionals in various fields. Yeah. And we have to know that those people can understand how to read and a manual to whatever thing they're going to use, or to be able to write a journal if you're working in medicine. I think that's a very, very important question that we need to address. And that's, again, that's where we also do our job, because we adapt the language, for example, so that students can read it. So in one way, I think our future looks bright, and that's my perspective.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to add also in the other end of the spectrum, I think that we would need more difficult books, which is in a sense in the borderline between scientific books for the academic or purely scientific academic audience and the student. Field introductions, more difficult books that add some synthesis value, for example, in a research perspective, but also works as textbooks. So I'm writing on such a book myself at the moment, when I think we add value to our field because we synthesize various kinds of work over the last 2 decades into a book, but also has the ambition that it should work as an introductory book for students. So I think that we need more of that rather than simplifications. And I think that the reading comprehension and that you meet a broad spectrum of different kinds of material for students, and that also means that we need to again experiment and use not only books as course materials, but also other forms in different ways. And I think that that's where open resources could really make a difference if we are open to that. But again, this is even more mucky in terms of economic and development structures.
A multimodal approach, so to speak. Do we have a question in the audience? Yes. We have 1 minute, but I think it's worth a question. The cake will come.
You were talking about that you add different kinds of value and that you're not publishing the same kind of texts or books. But if you would collaborate, Kriterium and Natur Kultur, how would that collaboration, would it look like?
Okay.
What I can say is that what would be required of Niklas, and basically it would look like it is and like any other book published by Natur Kultur. But what we have is that on one of the front pages, titelsidan, title page, you add sort of reviewed within Kriterium, and then a reference to our homepage, and basically what the publishers that we collaborate with, they have started specific series within their system that sort of is connected to Kriterium. So that would probably be a way of solving that, and that then series has a different kind of timeline than other series. It's not going, the kind of production planning looks different, but when you have the book in hand, the difference is that it also then would have an open access point of entry from Kriterium. So those would be the two differences. I think that would be the main. So it's not sort of world pronouncing, but sort of it is a different kind of possibility for dissemination. What we add with the academic review is a sort of a deep kind of quality development, and the publishers that we collaborate with, they say that, well, the books become 50 and 100% better with the kind of review that we have. And that is an added value from a scientific point of view, because you can get really sharp kind of addition to that.
Thank you. So basically it would look like any other book, it's just that it has two different versions and a quality mark.
Yeah, from our point of view, we would have to minimize the risk, because we still have to buy food in the supermarket when we go there. So it's about funding.
Yeah. But would you be open to exploring that idea?
Absolutely, if we believe in the project itself, and we'd like to put our name on it. Yes, no problem.
Eva,
and we can fund it. If a researcher applies for funding from us and adds any cost for open access publishing or printing, we will fund it.
See, do we have a solution though? Not 100%. Okay, this was an invigorating talk. I love the different perspectives. You did a great job. Thank you so much. I hope to see you around again for more conversations whenever you have time. So thank you so much.